Today we are talking about hope in Tolkien, and of course today this broadcast is for the purpose of raising awareness and raising support for the relief efforts in Turkey and Syria for the victims of the major earthquake there this week. I am joined by Caner Şenol from Orta Dünya today. Caner, tell us where you're located over there in Turkey.
First of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for your support in this great tragedy. I
Yes.
live in Ankara. It's away from the earthquake region, but
Mm-hmm.
my family and I are not affected by this earthquake. But many of my followers and fellow human beings are affected by it. Um, I knew that we are a big fellowship as Tolkien fans. We have no boundaries. We are not bound by only a book. We are bound together by themes like fellowship, hope, and solidarity. That's why I reach out to you, and you proved me right. Thank you again.
Oh, it is just such a privilege to be able to do anything to help. And of course, there are two goals that I have for our broadcast here today. One, of course, is to I do want to raise awareness among. I know it's very easy on the other side of the world to maybe hear something about this on the news and not think about it. And so I wanted to take some time to be thinking about it and to be aware of what is going on and to give as we can. I am including uh, a a link to a little fundraising campaign to support a local disaster relief organization over there in Turkey. So I've just posted in the chat the link. I've been posting that in other places. Of course, there are other places that you can give as well. You don't have to give through this link alone, but would want to support people. I've made a donation. I know, people I know have made donations here already through this link. So I would just encourage people, if you can even make a small donation to help to support relief efforts. It will make a big deal. It'll make a big difference. So that's one purpose, is just to see if we can generate as much help and support as we possibly can. But the second thing also is I know that there are many Tolkien fans in Turkey, people who have been affected by this, who are listening as well. And we want to support and encourage you guys as much as we possibly can. And as you say, John, Tolkien is this is a significant theme in Tolkien. I wanted to talk about hope today because hope is one of the major themes of Tolkien, and of course, it's an important thing to think about. It's an important thing to remember at times like this. John, what are some of your favorite hope passages in the Lord of the Rings? What are some, when you think about hope in Tolkien, what are some of the main moments that you think of?
Firstly, when I reached out to you, a Tolkien quote echoed in my mind and inspired me to reach out to you, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest. It's from the Silmarillion between Manwe and Yavanna.
Yes.
Uh, all have their word, and each contributes to the word of the others. It inspired me, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not about hope, it's about solidarity.
Right.
Um,
Right.
yeah. Um, but when I think about hope and doing something uh, in a day like this, because sticking to hope is important. It gives us the strength to keep going in the face of challenges. Um, the most obvious one, and they used it in the movie as well. Even the smallest person can change the course of the future.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and
Mm-hmm.
the other one, all we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us.
Yes.
Those are the quotes echoed in my mind.
Yeah, no, that seems really applicable in this moment in particular. I know one of the things that I often think about when faced with something like this. You read about this enormous thing that's not only how huge this earthquake was and how enormous the suffering that has been caused by it, but also for us here in America, how far it is away, and just the knowledge that something that big and that far away has happened. You feel for people, but you also feel helpless, right? Like there's nothing I can do. This is too big and too far of a problem for me, and but exactly as you say, all we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us, right? To do something within our scope, that even small things done by us. So again, even small things like donations to support the organizations that are out there, helping to try to rescue, still rescue efforts still going on, to be sending food and medicine to the the people who are homeless and suffering and cold as well. I mean, that this should happen in the winter makes it so much more difficult for everyone.
Yeah, definitely.
Over there. So anyway, I again, it's obviously this is not a problem that any one of us sitting here in America can solve, but we can all help, and we can all help a little bit. So I think that's yeah. Go ahead.
I'm an earthquake victim myself, but it was 24 years ago. In 1999, we had another devastating earthquake in Marmara region. Istanbul.
Yes.
It's in the Marmara region. Luckily, I didn't lose any family members, but it was devastating for me to lose my home, my friends, my neighbors. So it's easier for me to empathize with the victims today, but it may be harder for you to know what happened here in Turkey. Do you mind if I talk a little bit?
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't want to sound like a news reporter.
No, but this is important. I think a lot of people don't really know what's going on. We'd love to hear that.
Yeah, but I'd like to give some idea of what happened here. 5 days ago, southern Turkey hit by not one but two devastating earthquakes in an interval of only 9 hours. Magnitudes of these earthquakes are 7.8 and 7.6. These are the largest earthquakes in Europe's history, and one of the largest in the world. These earthquakes hit 10 cities with the population of 14 million people. First one was at 4 a.m., so almost everyone was caught while they were sleeping. And the second one finished off the damaged buildings from the previous one. Right. Over 20,000 people died so far, but we believe that this they hide the actual number from us. We believe that the actual number is assumed to be over 100,000, 100K. Babies and children died or lost their parents. Instead of growing up with their parents in a warm home, they will grow in an orphanage, the best case scenario. Millions of people lost their homes. It's like Hiroshima after the nuclear bomb there. The cities are almost completely destroyed. You can, of course, you can Google the images if you like. Yes. Also, the weather is so cold in Turkey right now. It's freezing, minus 12 degrees in Celsius, and I believe it's 10 in Fahrenheit.
Yes.
Structures are destroyed. Power is down. Hospitals, bridges, and roads are damaged. They're in need of dire help. There's a list of items they need. I heard that when I asked for your help, I said even spreading the word is important, and even spreading the awareness is important. But donations are really important as well, and they need blankets, tents, bread, water, raincoats, mats, heaters, canned food, energizing food, sandwiches, juice, searchlight, diapers, hygiene items, coats, boats, even the simple basic necessities are needed in the region. And another important thing is there's a huge currency difference between Turkish lira and American dollars or euro. So every donation you make means a lot here. 1 American dollar means 19 Turkish liras and 20 for euro. The difference is huge. So if you send $10, a lot can be done. Even 10 with $10, a lot
Right.
can be done here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good to know. Well, thank you for that. I mean, it is something that I think, again, it's easy in America, since this is so far away, to let this be just sort of another news item, that comes across your feed, and not really realizing the full extent of this. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for talking about that. It is, yeah, it is good to know what is actually going on. There are the efforts right now primarily focused on just sort of like supplies and survival. I know they've been doing search and rescue as well. What are the do you know what kind of the right now the current sort of urgency is there?
Search and rescue is almost complete. I mean, the hope diminishes
Yes.
for the people under the rubbles.
Mm-hmm.
And they are trying to help out the people in tents. They are trying to provide them basic necessities.
Mm-hmm.
The most important thing is to keep people alive. The
Yes.
people already um, survive this earthquake needs our help. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I wanted to talk for just a few minutes about some Tolkien things, if I could. And I wanted to start. I'm starting from the Silmarillion, and I don't know how many of the Tolkien fans that are listening have read the Silmarillion. I know not all have, but I kind of wanted to go back to something like the beginning. Well, the very beginning in terms of Middle Earth, but pretty close to the beginning in terms of Tolkien's own writings as well. From some passages that were there from pretty close to the very beginning of when he started doing his mythology. Because one of the things that I think is so important about Tolkien, one of the things that makes Tolkien so applicable, even when times are difficult. Tolkien is not just a like feel good when you're happy kind of book. There is real sustenance for when times are very difficult. Tolkien's stories and Tolkien's world are in touch with sorrow and with suffering in ways that not a lot of books are. And so I wanted to go back to the beginning, as I said, and look at some of the things that Tolkien says, how he deals with a basic question. Of course, as many people know, Tolkien was Catholic. He was very invested in his Christian beliefs, and of course, one question which has, been a fundamental issue, a fundamental question for Christians and other theists for millennia, has been, why does God let things like this happen? Why do bad things happen? How can we understand? How can we relate to bad things? How can we fit this kind of disaster, this kind of suffering, into a picture of a world which is run by a good God? That's just a fundamental question that, of course, millions of people have had over the years. And Tolkien, I think, addressed this question. I think that this is sort of there at the root of his works. How do you deal with suffering? How does that fit into a world that is run by Iluvatar, as he describes it? Iluvatar, of course, his name for God. It means All-Father. So I'll try not to give too much synopsis, but the first passage I'm going to read from the from the Ainulindale, the music of the Ainur, which is his account of creation. And of course, creation is brought about, the creation of the world is brought about by the music, by a choir of angelic beings, basically, singing together, the Ainur. But Melkor, of course, who is Morgoth, who is Sauron's boss, eventually, Melkor creates a discord. He makes disharmony. He starts to try to take over the music and twist it to his own ends, and he creates chaos in the middle of it. And there are the Ainur who remain faithful to the original vision of Iluvatar, and those who come to follow Melkor, and they're sort of, different competing sections of the orchestra until finally the music stops. And then as soon as it does, Iluvatar speaks. And we don't actually... Tolkien gave relatively few speeches to Iluvatar. Like, this is, there are not all that many things that he actually has Iluvatar saying in his writings, but this is one of the most important ones. Then Iluvatar spoke, and he said, "Mighty are the Ainur, and mightiest among them is Melkor. But that he may know, and all the Ainur, that I am Iluvatar, these things that ye have sung, I will show them forth, that ye may see what ye have done. And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined." So Iluvatar says that Melkor's rebellion, which brought about chaos and tension, and we're told that all of the bad things, like, this is what is, you may have heard the expression Arda marred, right? Arda, which is the world, right, has been marred, has been corrupted. There's now pain and suffering sort of built into it. It doesn't work like it's supposed to, and that is a result. That is the expression of the discord of Melkor here. But Iluvatar says, "No theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite." The discord only happened because he let it happen. And he that attempteth this, anybody who attempts to change the music, to do something different, anybody who tries to mess it up, any bad thing that comes into it, shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he hath yet imagined, than he hath yet imagined. So Iluvatar says that all of the bad stuff, all of the pain, all of the suffering that is brought into the world is ultimately going to be his instrument for bringing about things more wonderful than anybody could possibly imagine. Now that's encouraging in its way, right? This is Tolkien's idea that even the horrible things, and of course Tolkien was himself very acquainted with suffering and sorrow and horrible things. He said that this, all of this suffering is only going to be the means by which God is somehow going to bring about something more, something greater, something even more wonderful than like those who intend and design, like Melkor, the horrible things, could even imagine. That's the sort of assurance, right? But that's hard to see on the ground, right? What does that mean? The thing that Tolkien never does in his works is just downplay the suffering. Just say, so the suffering doesn't matter. The pain doesn't matter, because it's all going to be fine. It's all going to come out really well, right? Just think about that and focus on that. There's much more than that, right? He always is in touch with the sorrow that people actually have. And so this is the second and related passage that I wanted to read, which is the description of the Vala Nienna. So again, for those who are only familiar with the Lord of the Rings, Nienna is a goddess, an angelic figure who lives in the west in Valinor. She's one of the great ones who came into the world and have been ruling the world. and she was Gandalf's old teacher. We are told that that Gandalf, before he took on a body and came over to Middle-earth, learned from her and studied with her. In his description, he says that Nienna dwells alone. She is acquainted with grief and mourns for every wound that Arda has suffered in the marring of Melkor. So great was her sorrow as the music unfolded that her song turned to lamentation long before its end, and the sound of mourning was woven into the themes of the world before it began. But she does not weep for herself, and those who hearken to her learn pity and endurance and hope. Her halls are west of west, upon the borders of the world, and she comes seldom to the city of Valimar, where all is glad. She goes rather to the halls of Mandos, which is there where the dead come, which are near to her own, and all those who wait in Mandos cry to her, for she brings strength to the spirit and turns sorrow to wisdom. The windows of her house look outward from the walls of the world. Nienna, the tears of Nienna. Nienna is, there are many mythologies, many different kind of, pantheons in history and in literature. Nienna is one of the most remarkable figures, I think, in all of that. Tolkien, within his mythology, within his conception of the world, he has a person, right? He has a central figure whose whole responsibility, you've got the person whose primary responsibility is the skies and the winds, and one who's the sea, and one who is building the mountains, and then you have one whose responsibility is weeping, is just weeping, to be the one who is observing, who is always feeling for the sufferings of others. Tolkien never just skims over, just looks over the suffering of people. He always acknowledges this, and from her comes pity. From her is inspired pity for others. Pity is, I think, is a word we don't like to use a lot in the modern world. Pity gets a bad rap in today's world, and of course there are lots of ways in which the concept of pity can be used in a negative way. But at its root, when he's describing Nienna here, pity is merely the recognition and acknowledgement of the suffering of others. To see that people suffer, and to acknowledge it, and to sympathize with that suffering. At the end of ultimately, that is pity, and that's what Nienna is doing all the time. That is why she's always weeping. And the result of it, as Tolkien says, she brings strength to the spirit and turns sorrow to wisdom. So these are some of the things that I think are those are passages from very early in Tolkien's work, from very early in his mythology. But those ideas, I think, really kind of are woven through so much of the story that he's written. The basic framework of hope, that all shall be well, and yet also this continuous recognition that the suffering of people matters, and that sorrow can be turned to wisdom, and that we can do, John, as you were pointing out before, right? We can. There are things that small hands can do, right? The opportunities that we have to help others, to act in pity, and then that can bring strength and wisdom. But speaking of strength and wisdom, we are joined by our first special guest today. Sorry, Alan, I couldn't resist the segue.
Wow, that was quite the segue there. Strength and wisdom. I'm just looking around trying to find some. All
right, we're joined by Alan Sisto from the Prancing Pony podcast. Thanks, Alan, for joining us.
It is absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you.
I am so glad that we're doing this, and all I can say is I'm hopeful that my listeners will also be taking part in this and being generous, as they've been generous to support the show and our community, and I'm hopeful that they'll be extraordinarily generous today in supporting the people of Turkey in the face of this disaster. Corey, thank you for putting us together and bringing so many Tolkien content creators into one event, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. So,
Of course.
I love the passage you chose. When you said Silmarillion, part of me froze for a moment because the passage I chose is also from the Silmarillion. But I thought the minute you started talking about the very beginning, I knew where you were going, and it's such a beautiful passage. It's so hard to grapple with, so hard to grapple with, and the way Tolkien does is fantastic. Spibimi, which is the way we shorten "shall prove but mine instrument," has been a really deep theme in the Legendarium that we constantly come back to, and it's really neat to see. So do I go ahead and kind of discuss the passage I thought about, and then we'll just talk some more about hope? Okay.
Absolutely.
So I'm also going to be pulling from the Silmarillion, and I'm going back to a much later time in the First Age. At this point, Morgoth has left the Undying Lands, and he's pretty much running his show in Middle-earth, making life extraordinarily difficult for the men and elves there, and there have been a number of battles, and we are at the 5th battle, called the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, which is the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. And it starts there, but in an example of Spibimi, in an example of this idea of "shall prove but mine instrument," it doesn't end there. So I'm going to start with a passage from the battle itself, and I'll fill you in a little bit on who the characters are for those of you who aren't as familiar. The field was lost, but still Hurin and Huor and the remnant of the house of Hador stood firm with Turgon of Gondolin, and the hosts of Morgoth could not yet win the pass of Sirion. Then Hurin spoke to Turgon, saying, "Go now, Lord, while time is, for in you lives the last hope of the Eldar, and while Gondolin stands, Morgoth shall still know fear in his heart." But Turgon answered, "Not long now can Gondolin be hidden, and being discovered, it must fall." Then Huor spoke and said, "Yet if it stands but a little while, then out of your house shall come the hope of elves and men. This I say to you, Lord, with the eyes of death, though we part here forever, and I shall not look on your white walls again, from you and from me a new star shall arise. Farewell." We're going to skip forward a little bit, but to give you a little bit of background on who those people are, Hurin and Huor are men. They are brothers. Turgon is the elfin king who rules in Gondolin. It is a hidden city. Very well hidden, I might add. Morgoth has been looking for it for a very long time and would do just about anything to get his hands on it. It's the center of, shall we say, the leadership of the elves that would fight and stand against him. So what Turgon is saying, of course, is Morgoth's going to find us, and once he finds us, it's all over. And Hurin and Huor are saying, if it just stands a little while longer, there's hope to be found. And we're going to read about that hope, but that hope comes at a cost. Much later, after Turgon was able to escape behind the guard of Hurin and Huor, and after the death of Huor, the man who just said those words, we read, "Last of all, Hurin stood alone. Then he cast aside his shield and wielded an axe two-handed, and it is sung that the axe smoked in the black blood of the troll guard of Gothmog until it withered, and each time that he slew, Hurin cried, 'Aule in Tuluva, day shall come again.' And though he uttered that cry 70 times, he was eventually captured and taken before Morgoth. And we know of the evil that befell his family, his son Turin, his daughter Nienor, even his wife Morwen. It was just children of Hurin. I'm not going to be able to try to summarize the children of Hurin in one paragraph, but that's that story. But the thing is, Huor was right, and I'm going to fast forward. Out of Gondolin, out of the lines of Huor and Turgon, a new star did arise, and it was indeed the hope of elves and men. And that's where we go next, all the way to the very last chapter of the Quenta Silmarillion, with a character named Eärendil, who is the son of Idril, who is Turgon's daughter, and Tuor, the son of Huor. So it's indeed right out of their lines. But Eärendil climbed the green hill of Tuna and found it bare. And he entered into the streets of Tirion, and I forgot to set the stage here. He's sailed all the way to Valinor, to the Undying Lands, where man cannot go. he goes there, it could cost him his very life. He does not belong here by any stretch of the imagination. So he gets there, he finds the city empty, and he enters into the streets of Tirion, and they were empty. And his heart was heavy, for he feared that some evil had come even to the blessed realm. He walked in the deserted ways of Tirion, and the dust upon his raiment and his shoes was a dust of diamonds. And he shone and glistened as he climbed the long white stairs. And he called aloud in many tongues, both of elves and men, but there were none to answer him. Therefore he turned back at last towards the sea. But even as he took the shoreward road, one stood upon the hill and called to him in a great voice, crying, Hail, Earendil, of mariners most renowned, the looked for that cometh at unawares, the longed for that cometh beyond hope. Hail, Earendil, bearer of light before the sun and moon, splendor of the children of earth, star in the darkness, jewel in the sunset, radiant in the morning. That voice was the voice of Eonwe, herald of Manwe, and he came from Valimar and summoned Earendil to come before the powers of Arda. And it was when he came before the powers of Arda and pleaded the case of men and elves, because he represented both men and elves, and came from that line, they listened, and they came to Middle-earth with the most force you could possibly imagine, and cleaned out Morgoth's dungeons and took Morgoth back and cast him beyond the doors of everlasting night. He's gone from this world, and it is all because Huor and Hurin stood, because they told Turgon, go ahead and hide, get back there, because from you and from me is going to come the hope of elves and men. And it's just a reminder of what Corey talked about, the long picture. It's very little comfort to Huor and Hurin that this would happen generations later. It didn't save them, but it still was turned to good. And that's a theme that we see throughout the Legendarium. So thank you, Corey, for letting me read that. Yeah.
Of course, the words of Hurin there in the fens of Serach as he is being captured, Aure and Tulava, they shall come again, is itself possibly the greatest encapsulated expression of hope, of hope under horrible circumstances where everyone around him has died and he is being taken, and he knows he's going to be taken, captive in front of Morgoth himself, and then after that his whole family cursed and everything else, and yet his cry in hope, day shall come again, is again that is just a phrase, an expression, an idea that resonates through so much of Tolkien's work.
Yeah, it's so powerful, and it's something that's gotten me through some difficult times. Certainly nothing like what the nation of Turkey is facing right now, nothing remotely approaching that. But when we face our own circumstances that turn our lives upside down, it's reminders that day will come again. And I'm sure we're going to have some amazing passages. That's Tolkien. The theme of hope is rich in Tolkien. I can't wait to hear more.
Absolutely. Johnner, did you have any thoughts? Anything you wanted to interject?
No, it was so touching. I don't have anything more to add.
Yeah. I'm wondering how. I know that many times over the years in broadcasting with Tolkien, there's a lot of people, a lot of Tolkien fans have expressed. I know Alan has faced this too. Challenges and difficulties in reading the Silmarillion and getting through the Silmarillion. A lot of Tolkien fans struggle with the Silmarillion. A lot of fans of the Lord of the Rings struggle with the Silmarillion when they try to read it. Is that something that you've found among Tolkien fans that you talk with in Turkey as well, John? Or do you think how familiar do you think the sort of the average Tolkien fan in Turkey is with the Silmarillion?
Not so much. They are very familiar with of course, the movies, and they captured some of their attention to the Lord of the Rings books and the Hobbit, but when they start reading the Silmarillion, they get stuck in the first part, Aunilindale.
Yeah.
They can't get past. Most of them don't get past the first part. So Silmarillion is not really. Their Turkish people are not really familiar with Silmarillion. Most of them.
I was wondering that. I can't imagine that. The English is hard, even for native English readers.
Yes, it
in the
is.
Silmarillion. So I would imagine it would be very challenging.
Yeah, it's like Old Turkish. The translation is like Old Turkish from the Ottoman ages.
Oh, really? So they actually did. So they translated it in an old Turkish idiom, basically.
It sounds like that.
It sounds like that. Oh, that's fun.
Yeah,
That's
cool. They were able to maintain that archaism in the translation.
Yeah,
that's great.
That's at least giving a fair sense of, because that's what it sounds like to
Yeah.
English people too. You know, when English readers read that, they're like this. I mean, the comparison that people usually make is to like the King James Bible. Like it sounds
exactly,
like the King James. You know, from 500 years ago. But I wasn't even 100% sure that there was a Turkish translation of the Silmarillion. Actually, has have his. I assume that the more sort of recently published works have been translated into Turkish. Things like Baron and Luthien and The Fall of Gondolin and things like that.
They translated all of them except History of Middle Earth. They didn't translate.
That was going to be my next question, was whether or
That's
not History of
tricky.
Middle Earth had been translated. Yeah.
It's they don't expect people to buy it in Turkey, so that's why they don't bother translating it. But the recent books, they translated them.
Okay. Okay. Well, I hope you guys get the History of Middle Earth eventually, because it's wonderful. But yeah, no, that's understandable. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well. So that's why I know Al and I were both we both were reading from the Silmarillion and both trying to kind of give as much context and not make assumptions as possible, because I know that often happens. But so many of these, as I mentioned before, the Silmarillion, well, it's complicated because, of course, Tolkien never actually finished the Silmarillion in his life, but a lot of these stories that are included in the Silmarillion are things that he began writing very, very early. So in a lot of ways, the Silmarillion serves as a kind of, it's not exactly like the foundations of a building compared to the Lord of the Rings. It's more like the bedrock on which the building gets constructed, essentially. So that's kind of it's the metaphor I would use to say to the relationship between the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings. So a lot of these moments which have been so inspiring to many people in the Lord of the Rings, I think it's good to think about the roots in these older stories that Tolkien wrote, and because in many of these places we can see him thinking about hope, thinking about pity, thinking about suffering in ways that are going to directly influence the Lord of the Rings story, and which are going to be very much kind of underlying thing. I mean, we think about with pity, right? The place where pity is raised in The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings story, of course, is Bilbo's pity for Gollum, right? That's the very first major reference. First, what does that even mean? Chronologically, like in The Hobbit, right, we get that emphasis of Bilbo feeling pity for Gollum, and then that pity we see, of course, Frodo and also Sam, sort of both at different times experiencing that same pity for Gollum and for Gollum's suffering. But anyway, I mean, all of these, and the way that Sam perseveres in hope, as well, pity and hope. I don't know. I mean, I was connecting pity and hope from the beginning, because to me, I think in Tolkien, those are very essentially connected ideas. Yeah, yeah. What are some ways, Alan, in which you think some of the passages that you were reading, the Earendel stuff, the Fens of Serech, after the Nirnaitha Arnoediad, what are some of the ways in which you think some of those ideas kind of, kind of work through or kind of bubble up in the Lord of the Rings?
Ooh, yeah, that bubble up into the Lord of the Rings. I think the biggest thing we see is the idea that hope is what often inspires someone to fight until the very end, even against overwhelming odds. Yeah, I mean, there's Hurin swinging his axe, and the description of that scene in the larger passage is really rich. And he ends up with literally the arms of dead orcs grappling him because he's hewn them off with the axe, and it's just piles of orcs around him. And he keeps on fighting even though he knows he's going to be captured and taken to Morgoth. And it's sort of this concept that we see repeated in Tolkien in scenes where there's very little chance of success. I mean, we could always throw the comedic line from the films that Gimli has about large a likelihood of death, and then odds
Small
of success,
hope of victory. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But there's some connection there, right? I mean, Gimli may have thrown that away as sort of a comic line, but that's very much the themes that we see. Yes. And Eowyn facing off against the Witch King. That is a hopeless battle in terms of martial skill. Yes. It's absolute, no chance. But she does it anyway, and it works out anyway, which obviously isn't always the case. We read this story about Hurin, and we read that because it's important to what happens with the rest of that line. But there are going to be other men in that battle who would have fought valiantly to the very end, who aren't even in the story. Yeah. Because they had that same hope. Now, we don't get to read their stories because it doesn't end the way this one ends. But that's a thing that we see constantly throughout, is that hope, not only does hope lead to pity sometimes, and vice versa, hope also leads to courage. And it's an amazing sort of triangle of those three that we often see. But you were mentioning the Frodo and Bilbo moments and the pity about Bilbo, or that Bilbo had about Gollum. It made me think back to the passage that you referenced earlier about Nienna, because of course Gandalf was a student of Nienna, and he's the one who helped Frodo move from revulsion and anger that Bilbo
deserves death,
kill him, to feeling pity for him. He goes from that moment about it's a pity Bilbo didn't kill him when he had the chance, to now that I do see him, I do pity him. Yes. And it was Gandalf's teaching vis-a-vis Nienna that got him there. Absolutely.
Hi, so we're joined here by Kirsten Cairns from theonering.net. Kirsten, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Kirsten.
It's my pleasure. It was so great that you put this together, Corey. Really a great idea. Always great to chat with fellow fans, and couldn't be for a better cause. So thanks for letting me join you for a bit.
Yeah, I wanted to just actually take that as a moment to remind people to make a donation. We have I can repost the link again. Hang on a second. I know it's been
tweeted it on the One Ring's Twitter. I just tweeted that link as well. So anyone who's looking at the One Ring Net Twitter, you can also find Corey's link there that he set up for donations.
Great. Yes, and we have in that campaign raised over 23,000 lira already today, which is wonderful. And as we said, the exchange rate for dollars and euros is really favorable. So again, even small donations can make a really big impact. So thank you to everybody who has donated so far, and if you haven't yet, still plenty of time, and really encourage you to do that. And I'm really grateful for the generosity people have been showing today. Well, Kirsten, we've been talking about hope and pity today in Tolkien, and the way in which these important ideas are sort of woven through all of Tolkien's work. Is there a Tolkien moment that you would like to share about that?
Yeah, I was thinking about I'm sure you've already mentioned, of course, the moment of Sam seeing the star.
We haven't yet, actually. Believe it or not, we haven't yet.
I wanted to leave that for somebody else.
Definitely my favorite moment. But Sam is the one who gets these little glimpses of hope, isn't he? Because he's the one who says the king has got a crown again.
Yes.
As well. So
yes.
He sees the flowers, he sees the star, and hope is kindled in his heart. But I found myself thinking actually about the two different kinds of hope as I see it that we get in Tolkien. There's the hope of the bigger picture hope, which is definitely what Sam seeing that star is, that he says in that passage specifically, that he no longer worries about what happens to him or even to Mr. Frodo, because he recognizes that there's a bigger picture, and that there is always hope beyond the darkness, even if it's beyond our own lifetimes to see it. So there's that kind of big picture hope, which is maybe part of Tolkien's faith and his belief in the divine. But then again and again, you get this hope that comes from people. And I was thinking of, Kate Blanchett beautifully saying, "Yet hope remains while the company is true."
Yes.
And the hope that you have from the small deeds, that even the smallest person can affect the course of the future and all of that. And so I thought, I like this idea that hope can come from us, that we can be the bearers of encouragement and hope for each other. And I think that you get that a great deal in Tolkien, in the fellowship and the companionship, and
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it connects back even to Alan, what you and I were just talking about, that the kind of hope that Hurin shows under even similar circumstances, right? I mean, when Sam goes on in Mordor, I mean, it's interesting because it seems that in part, at first, his hope seems to be based, or at least to include, like so Tolkien talks about two kinds of hope, right? There's Estel, which is that big picture hope that Kirsten was just talking about. And then there's Umdir, which is the kind of hope which says, I think things are going to turn out well. Like, I think there's a good chance things are going to succeed, right? When you're thinking about that, when you're feeling like, I feel confident I'm going to get this job or whatever, right? That's Umdir. That's that other kind of hope. Sam at first has that, right? Like he's planning for the homeward journey. Like, we're going to get there, we're going to throw the ring in the fire, and then we're going to make it home, right? But then there comes the time when he gives up hope. That kind of hope. He does not believe that they're going to survive. He does not believe that they're going to make it home. And yet he keeps going, right? Despite the fact that, when he crosses that point where he does not believe that any good is going to come to him or to Frodo as a result of this, and yet he keeps going. And a lot of that is, that moment when he sees the star, that moment when he sees the flowers, as you say, when he sees the crown.
Well, he says himself. I was looking at that bit in The Return of the King, and it says his song in the tower had been defiance rather than hope.
Yes.
I like that distinction. But then he was thinking of himself. Now, for a moment, his own fate and even his master's ceased to trouble him. It's that, as you say, Corey, it's that bigger, it's that Estel, it's that hope.
Yeah, when his own fate ceased to trouble him. So it's both his sort of resting in that, as of course literally he rests, like his response to that is to go to sleep, right? And just to trust that things, like he doesn't have to stay awake to look after Mr. Frodo. It's not in his hands, right? But at the same time, after that, it is about like what he is doing and what he's going to continue to do. That kind of hope, that kind of trust doesn't result in him sitting back and doing nothing, right? It inspires him to continue to move forward, even when he believes that there's, for him, no hope, right? For his immediate survival and immediate future. And then, of course, in this amazing turn, right, which takes Sam entirely by surprise, right? He doesn't die, and he does, benefit from this and survive and go on, and the hope for himself, which he had given up, is borne out, right? There's, when I love of course, the Field of Cormallin is just so beautiful. That is when Frodo and Sam wake up after their ordeal, and they've been rescued, and of course he sees Gandalf, and they didn't know that Gandalf was alive again. He's seen Gandalf for the first time since he disappeared into the chasm, right? And I love Sam's statement. He says, "I thought you were dead, but then I thought I was dead."
Exactly.
Is everything sad going to come untrue?
Yeah.
Yes. Is everything sad going to come untrue? And it is such a beautiful moment. And that moment then when they come out and are welcomed by everyone and praised by everyone, Alan, I'm thinking of when we were just in Marquette looking at the Tolkien manuscripts, and you can see on the manuscript of that passage the tear stains from when Tolkien himself was weeping while writing that passage.
It was so powerful.
It's funny. I just was having a conversation with my mother, and this does relate back to Tolkien, I promise. But one of her cousins just passed away, and they went to the funeral, and the father of this cousin, it was a big family of siblings, and the older brothers were in the First World War, and so it was the father of this older cousin of my mother's, and we were talking about his service, and he'd signed up in August 1914, so he signed up right at the beginning and made it through, which is kind of astonishing that served through those 4 years. And two of the brothers of this family had both served through all the 4 years. And I was saying, I don't know how anyone survived mentally. I don't know. And I remember meeting this Uncle Jack when I very vaguely, I think I was like 3 and he was in his 90s, and but he went on to live a normal life. Mm-hmm. But I think how astonishing to have come through that as Tolkien did, and find a way to keep going when the horror that you've seen, and the trauma and the loss, and that line, "Is everything sad going to come untrue?" just really gets to my heart, because he must have longed for the sadness to come untrue.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you think of how much of the suffering that he describes in Sam and Frodo's journey there in Mordor, of all of the moments in The Lord of the Rings, those are some of the ones where we can see the most visceral connections to Tolkien's own experience there in World War I, and the suffering that he both endured himself and witnessed in others. I'm thinking about, of course, the Dead Marshes, which is sort of famously connected with the Somme and the trenches and the dead bodies in the mud and everything, and then Mordor itself, right? And No Man's Land, which he actually put on the map, the Middle Earth map originally. He called it No Man's Land there. So everything, all of that. The suffering and the horror of being in there, all of that is a thing that Sam is walking through, right? That Sam and Frodo are both enduring, in addition to the kind of higher level spiritual trauma, right, of the ring and what's going on with the ring. So yes, in so many ways, that moment of at the Field of Cormallin, when there's that brief glimpse. Now, everything sad doesn't come untrue, right? It's not, because of course that would be, in a sense, there's a temptation for that, right? There's a temptation to be like, okay, I'm going to write like an escapist story in which that happens. There's this desire for that. Like, you wish you could just snap your fingers and then all of the suffering that has happened is going to, reverse itself, and all of the people whom you've lost and who have been killed are going to suddenly come alive again, right? Like, again, as happens with Gandalf there, in as far as Sam's concerned, right, in that moment, as far as he's concerned. But Tolkien resists that, right? He doesn't. That's not what the end of the Lord of the Rings is about. There's that moment, right, when it looks like it almost might be that result, and yet what we see as we go through the rest of the Lord of the Rings, from the wedding, followed immediately by the funeral of Theoden, right, and then going back and the scouring of the Shire, finding the Shire disrupted and wrecked and needing to rebuild, and how the hobbits of the Shire get together to rebuild the Shire. This is all this long process of seeing good come through and despite suffering, and Tolkien resisting that really, really powerful emotional impulse that he surely felt, merely to, as an author, snap his fingers and make everything sad come untrue, right? But we do still get that vision of it, which is really powerful.
And also recognizing that for some people, there wasn't a way forward. I think it's really important that Frodo says, "This is the Shire has been saved, but not for me.
Not for me.
I cannot find a way to go forward." And I think that's a great the loving tribute from Tolkien to that he found a way to keep putting one foot in front of the other, to keep having hope for the next day, for the rest of his long life. But he honors, I think, in a way, those who were not able to find that way forward and needed to go to the Grey Havens. And
absolutely.
I think it's beautiful that he does that. And then, but also that Frodo says to Sam, your part in the story must go on, right? Somebody has to keep going with hope. And some of us have to say, I have to bow out now. He sort of acknowledges all of those aspects beautifully in the way that he ends his story.
Yeah, the loss is real. I mean, Frodo shows us that the loss is real in the end, right? It's not that there is some suffering from which you can't have healing. I mean, this is one of the reasons why. I mean, when people talk about Tolkien being escapist, right? I'm like, come on, man! Like, I don't know a less escapist fantasy in the world than Tolkien.
All aspects of being a human being. Even when he's writing about beings who are not human beings, he
right.
Every aspect of the human condition, and he does not let you get away from any of them.
No. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think we have another guest coming in, Matt from Nerd of the Rings. Matt, welcome.
Hey,
thanks
guys.
for joining us.
Welcome. Yeah, thanks for having me. This is awesome. I'm so glad you guys are doing this today.
Yeah. Well, glad you could be here. And again, just to remind folks about our donation link, we're still raising funds for disaster relief over there in Turkey and Syria. So we've raised over now 26,000 lira, which is wonderful. Thank you everybody for your generosity. And encourage you to those who haven't yet still to donate. Every little bit helps in the relief efforts over there. So Matt, we've just been talking about Sam and everything sad not coming untrue, but having that brief vision of things sad coming untrue, and then but then confronting that reality of suffering and continuing to move forward. What are some of your reflections? What are some of the passages that you think about when you think about hope?
Yeah, so the Sam one was the first one. I think that's going to be a popular one, I'm sure, today.
Mm-hmm.
I had a couple others come to mind. One is Aragorn on his deathbed to Arwen.
Yes.
So I have the quote here. It's Aragorn and Arwen are going back and forth, and Arwen I love that Arwen brings up the Númenóreans who, turn to darkness because she gets why they did it, which is such a powerful thing because it's so easy to look back on those characters and say, look what idiots they were. And Arwen, faced with the death of her husband, is like, oh my gosh, I get why they were so worked up about this.
Yeah.
This whole death
But,
thing turns
yes.
out it's a big deal. Yeah,
It turns out it's a real bummer. Yeah.
yeah.
So, but then Aragorn comes in with some great wisdoms that are his final words. He says, "But let us not be overthrown at the final test, who of old renounced the shadow and the ring. In sorrow we must go, but not in despair. Behold, we are not bound forever to the circles of the world, and beyond them is more than memory. Farewell." I just love like that whole, if you guys listening have never dived into the appendices, you are missing out on some great stuff, because the tale of Aragorn and Arwen is, in my opinion, some of Tolkien's most beautiful writing.
It's really powerful. It's really powerful.
Because even hearing you read that now, it brings tears to my eyes. I just find it's beautiful and it is hopeful, but it's just so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Poignant beyond words.
And of course, her immediate response, right? What does she say in response to that speech? She says, Estelle, because that was his name. She's calling him by his name, by his childhood name. He was named Estelle when he was a kid, which means hope, right? So on the one hand, like simultaneously, she is calling out the name, the familiar and childhood name of her husband as he's dying, right? He's just died. He's just, he's just surrendered to death. And she's calling out his name in her own sorrow and grief. And yet what she is saying is hope, right? Yeah. And that the kind of sort of the irony of her response there, as we know, she is struggling with, she was just saying, and as we'll see afterwards, she's continuing to struggle with hope, in her own grief, in her own sorrow. But yes, the way in which Aragorn himself embodies and speaks forth hope, in his death there, it really is the, I think the sort of, I don't know, this is a big phrase to say, but it's sort of like the final statement about, like death and dying, like like this is the sort of how it should be, and yet, Kirsten, just as you were pointing out before, just like with Frodo at the end of the Lord of the Rings, grief and suffering and sorrow remains real. Right. And so even in that moment where Aragorn is expressing this, one of the purest versions, one of the fullest statements of Estelle, of hope, there's Arwen there suffering and grieving, and not able to, it seems, to process it. It is, Matt, as you say, it's so powerful. It's so beautiful.
He really captures there the idea of the gift of men.
Yes.
Not being tied to these circles is the gift of men, because there is something more, and that Estelle, that hope, relies on your confidence in that notion, which of course Tolkien himself absolutely had that belief that when we are released from this circle, there's something better.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I love that, this is Aragorn doing what the faithful Númenóreans of old would have done, which was, because they obviously have very long lives, and when they got to a point where, they could feel their decline coming on, they just die, kind of like we hear of elves do this too, but they just, they just gave up their lives, like not crazy like Denethor on a pyre or anything like that, but they just laid down and kind of, just peacefully passed on to whatever, lies before men beyond the circles of the world. And I love that, Aragorn kind of brings that back full circle.
And if I can interject a little bit, because it
Yeah.
brings also back full circle to some of the parts that I read earlier with Hurin and Huor. We
Yes.
talked about Hurin. We skipped the whole bit about him being taken captive before Morgoth, but there's something he says there that relates to this that's very important. Morgoth is just laying into him, and he's threatening him, and he's telling him about how powerful he is. And Hurin has just called him a thrall, which is beautiful. He says that he's an escaped thrall of the Valar. And this is this paragraph here. He says, "This last then I will say to you, thrall Morgoth, and it comes not from the lore of the Eldar, but is put into my heart in this hour. You are not the lord of men, and shall not be, though all Arda fall in your dominion. Beyond the circles of the world, you shall not pursue those who refuse you." And that's just another reminder of how death is a gift to men in that context, because it frees us from that domination and from that evil into something else that Tolkien never specifically lays out. And
Yes.
it's something that requires then Estelle, doesn't it? Because we don't know what's outside of that.
Yeah. And
But we know it's not that. Yeah.
Exactly. And that Estelle is really is the foundation of how so many of Tolkien's characters relate to the very real suffering
Yes.
of this world, and that hope not just for escape out of Arda, but for Arda remade itself, and the way in which even for that there isn't just like a haven, a good place waiting for men that they may get to, that Arda itself, and therefore the elves who are tied to it, will also at some point experience something which the elves and men know even less about. But again, there's this hope that that Arda will be not unmarred. Again, everything sad isn't just going to come untrue. Right? It's not just God's not just going to wave his hand and undo all the suffering that happens, but rather through all of this, through the gift of men itself, in some ways, the world itself will be transformed, and all of those things. And then back to that first passage that I shared, right? That any who attempt to bring suffering, any discord, any suffering and sorrow that enters into the world will prove but Iluvatar's instrument to make something greater and more beautiful that will come out of it. And so all of these things are sort of tied up together into that basic sort of framework of hope and faith that informs it. But it's we can see, again, this is like the bedrock stuff, right? The bedrock stuff on which so much of the story is written, and we can see so many different ways. It's interesting to think about how that gets applied, in various ways throughout the story. Think about how this affects the Shire and the scouring of the Shire, right? Think about how this affects Rohan. Alan, you were talking about the confrontation with the Witch King, right?
Yeah.
And I think even of Eomer's charge after this, right? Death take us all right
When he
now
thinks
to
there's
ruin
no
and the
hope.
world's ending.
Exactly.
Yes, right.
The Black Fleet is coming up. He thinks it's all over now. And Faye, I think that's one of the few times that it's the only time he's described as Faye, and it's one of only like 4 or 5 times that Faye is used in the Lord of the Rings, and it's him because he's seeing this with the eyes of death from his perspective. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, and you just think about how the one of the things that's always one of the moments of suffering that has always been really powerful for me, and I will say, I think I'm forgetting. Matt, you may remember the name of the actor who played Eomer in the film.
Carl Urban.
Carl Urban.
Yeah. But I was one of the top things that I am so glad that was captured, and it was his acting that captured it. The moment of his discovery of Eowyn, like that is one of the most moving. Like you think about from his perspective, right? He came prepared for death in battle. Theoden, his king, has just died, and he has just been just been saying like, let's not, more not over much, right? Mighty was the fallen, meat was his ending, and then he turns and there's his sister, like, not miraculously transported and killed right on the battlefield, like it's like a reverse eucatastrophe, right? Like, you know, and oh man, like, so his sudden suffering, the way in which he's taken so by surprise, and then you know, this disaster, and then anyway, the way that Carl Urban captured that, oh man, it's one of the most powerful moments in the entire films for me. The look on his face when he is holding Eowyn's body on the field, and then he does the Hurin, right? At that point, right, and moves, and then, you know, and then hope, and then the eucatastrophe strikes. In the passage that makes me cry every time I read The Lord of the Rings, no matter what. Aragorn arriving at the Harrowland gets me every time. Just so powerful there.
It's an interesting one, that the sort of that line between despair and making a grand gesture in despair. Hey, Maggie. And making a grand gesture out of hope, right? Or making a small gesture out of hope. You know, there's the small gestures that keep you going in hope, and there are the grand gestures that maybe come in the moment that you lose hope. And I'm thinking of, you know, Theoden saying, "How shall any tower withstand against such reckless hate?" Or whatever the exact quote in the book is. And in the movie, he says, "What can men do against such hate?"
Right.
That his moment of, I can't do anything. It's gone.
Powerless.
Yeah, but Aragorn just as well, let's do something. Let's do something, you know, and so a lot of the easier way to sort of retain any kind of hope is simply to say, we must do something, act in some way, and I think you see again and again in Tolkien's writing, do something in face of despair, in face of death. Do not go gentle into that good night kind of thing. Do something. Ride out with me. Ride out to meet them, whatever it might be. Don't just fade away in the face of hate, and you know.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're joined by another guest, Maggie Parke, my co-host from Other Minds and Hands. Maggie, welcome.
Hi, friends. Oh, it's so nice to see your faces, and it's so lovely to come together for this event. So thanks for organizing it, Corey.
Of course. Yeah, so no, we've just been talking about several film moments that were really powerful, and it is one of the things that I think the Peter Jackson films did a wonderful job of capturing this theme of hope, and there are many of these moments that I think they treated really well, where we can really feel that theme coming through.
Yeah, I think it's one of those, I was thinking about, you know, what we would chat about, and obviously adaptation's the thing I should probably talk about all the time. But, you know, we know with the text, we have so much time to be inspired by the space and the ability to breathe around the words and sit with the thoughts. And, you know, it takes hours to get through these texts, and we don't have that same time with a film. But the film side of it, we get the emotion, I think, so much faster because of all the devices they're able to use. And I do think Peter Jackson did such a great job with that. When you can play in, I came in just as you were talking about Éomer being discovered on the battlefield, and the visual of that, with the performance of that, with the music of that, like I'm getting a little verklempt just thinking about it, you know? So they're able to get across that emotion in such a short amount of time that will take pages and pages and pages in a text. So isn't that a powerful way to show the power of hope? That it only takes 10 seconds for me to get emotional remembering a film scene, you know, and how that's able to give us that. And what a gift that is for, I think, just humans too. We don't have many spaces where we're allowed to be emotional and where we're allowed to engage with each other on that kind of plane.
Yeah.
So when we can do that through fantasy literature and through epic film and live vicariously, and it's safe to show that emotion and to feel that strong sense of hope, oh, that's a lot of power in a really good way. So that was my thought on hope, that I think you started the thought reeling in my head a minute ago.
Yeah, it is. There are ways in which in which film, in which a visual adaptation can kind of challenge us more directly. Thinking back to what we were talking about before about pity as well, you know, the acknowledgement and recognition of suffering in another, and seeing, again, I think of the visual images from the film of Frodo and Sam in Mordor, and their obvious physical suffering, the parched lips, right, and the, you know, the way that all of this was kind of captured, and that, of course, the marvelous pictures. One of my other, probably another one of my top 5 moments of, you know, where I think the film captured so well something so powerful from the book, that Sam taking Frodo on his back and carrying him up the mountain, right, is again just so that image, even just a still image, right, of Sam carrying Frodo on his back there, in that is just, it so powerfully evokes both the suffering and the pity, as well as the hope, and that same sort of stubbornness and hope that we've been talking about, even when he's not saving Frodo, right? Like, he doesn't think he's saving Frodo. They're just doing what must be done, so that others can survive. It would be remarkable if he were just taking Frodo to safety or something, right? If he were just rescuing Frodo, it would be moving enough. But knowing that he's actually, you know, carrying Frodo as far as he knows towards death. Exactly. The cracks of doom.
It's an interesting point, Corey, because I think action is one of the ways that we can retain hope, and I think you see that in Tolkien, and you know, to be able to do something is kind of what we were just saying about riding out against reckless hate, or to be able to do something. And I think, you know, in a case of where here we are fundraising because something terrible has happened in the world, and of course we want to help, and also it helps us to be able to do something, to feel that in the face of nature's destruction and terrible things happening, what can I do is the question that we so often ask, you know. Right. And I remember saying to a friend who was battling cancer, and her husband was, you know, being an absolute rock for her, and she said, you know, he does so much for me, and I said, yes, but he needs that in a way. Yeah. That's what he needs from you, is for you to allow him to do something, because the worst thing for him would be to just look at you suffering and be helpless and not be able to do anything. You know, we get it in Sense and Sensibility in Jane Austen, where he says, "Give me something to do," when, you know, when Kate Winslet,
give me an occupation, woman, or I shall go mad.
Yeah, exactly. Alan Rickman says it to about Kate Winslet, right? You know. Yes. But it's that thing, and we see that in Tolkien, that for Sam, he's just got to be able to do something. Carry Frodo, share the last drops of water, whatever it is. The way that he finds hope is to be able to do something, to be active. And I, you know, I think, again, that's a very accurate depiction of how we are as human beings, that it's hardest to remain hopeful when you really feel that there is nothing that you can do.
Yeah. And also just the power of those small actions. It doesn't have to be flying over there to help move concrete. It can be asking someone how they're doing, you know. It can be watching a fundraiser and donating. Like, it doesn't matter how small it is. It's being able to facilitate that. And I feel like Tolkien's really good at illustrating that and showing the small things that create big movements.
Yes.
Hobbits.
Yes, exactly. That's of course another one of his major themes, right, of the Lord of the Rings, that you know, it is the work of small hands that move the wheels of the world, and that even those who are small, and of course it's not in the Council of Elrond in particular, towards the end, when Elrond is the one who makes the statement about small hands moving the wheels of the world, and of course there's there's an interesting irony that he seems to be almost wrestling with himself while he's saying that, which is not just that the wheels of the world are moved by small hands despite the fact that they're small, but that they're moved by small hands because they're small, right? I mean, it's like it is because Frodo's hands are so small that he can carry the ring, right? If they put the ring into the hands of someone greater and more powerful, it would have the more power to destroy them. Frodo is the ring bearer, is able to do the thing and to be the ring bearer because he is so small. And so there's this great emphasis that is placed on the ability and therefore, in its way, the responsibility of small people to do. I think of, the coming back around to the small hands doing things. I think of his emphasis on the hands. Literally, he talks about the hands of the hobbits who are helping to rebuild the Shire after the disaster of, the destruction that has been wreaked by the brigands there at the end. And he talks about the small hands of the hobbit children to the wrinkled and horny hands of the gammers and gaffers as they all got together and helped with the cleanup and with the rebuilding of the Shire after so much has been destroyed. And that's just, on the one hand, like, compared to the destruction of the ring, that might not seem like a really big deal. But again, he comes back in the end to emphasizing everybody contributing, everybody stepping up and doing what is in their reach to do for the benefit of all. And that the restoration after the scouring of the Shire, of course, feels particularly relevant, today as we think about the disaster and all of the. I mean, the first concern was, of course, search and rescue. The second concern, John, as you were saying before, was just survival, right? I mean, especially with the winter conditions and everything, and the people living in tents and just trying to stay warm and trying to feed everyone. But then, of course, still ahead after that comes rebuilding and trying to put things back together after this, and that too is something that Tolkien speaks of. Is something that is there in the story, from the the big things like wars and disasters to the the long rebuilding process. And I think there's hope there. There's hope in the scouring of the Shire as well, and that image of the Lothlorien dust, right, that Sam has in his box that he brings home, blessed by Galadriel, and that it's that the Shire will be even more blessed, right, after what he's done. But of course, you can see that even within the story, that feels like only a symbol, right, of the way in which the people of the Shire, right, have come together, like the good that has been done, that they have all been doing with each other and for each other through the rebuilding, has blessed not only the physical landscape of the Shire, but the culture and the people, both individually and collectively, of the Shire. And so blessing has come out of disaster, and certainly then it's once again coming back to shall prove but mine instrument of things more beautiful and more wonderful than they could have imagined. And we see that frame being put into place again, or being applied again, in a similar situation.
Corey, it's interesting you bring up the scouring of the Shire. This triggered my memory of another unlikely passage that I came up with when I was thinking of hope. I was trying really hard to come up with something dwarven because I love the dwarves, and there's not a ton there.
There's not a ton there, yeah.
But it's I didn't really make this connection to the scouring of the Shire and the fall of Khazad-dûm. These once beautiful, great places that are just destroyed. And it as I was looking at this from the angle of hope, I looked up the Song of Durin and how it ends. It has kind of this hopeful twist at the end. So
yes,
if I can go ahead and read, I've got it pulled up if you'd like me to go ahead and read it. And because I love the dwarves, I'm going to do it in a dwarven voice because why not? That's more fun anyway, right? All right. The world is grey, the mountains old. The forge's fire is ashen cold. No harp is rung, no hammer falls. The darkness dwells in Durin's halls. The shadow lies upon his tomb, in Moria, in Khazad-dûm. But still, the sunken, oh my gosh, I can't believe I botched that. But still the sunken stars appear in dark and windless Mirrormere. There lies his crown in waters deep, till Durin wakes again from sleep.
Wow.
I love how that ends on,
Yes.
because it's such
Yeah.
it can be such a downer of a song in some sense, but when you look at it through the lens of hope, you see the dwarves who are prone to being kicked out of their homes, you know, have this hope that one day Durin is going to return and things will change. And, you know, you wonder, like, when in dwarven history would this have been composed? You know, obviously this is after the fall of Khazad-dûm. So like, even after, you know, a Balrog has taken up residence in Khazad-dûm, they still have this hope that one day that Balrog will not be a factor and they will get to go home.
Yes. Yes. The idea of the, I mean, how poignant. One of the things that always really strikes me about that verse is that Khazad-dûm, like the name of is rhymed with tomb, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, it's like this acknowledgement that it's, I mean, Moria means the black pit, right? Like, you know, what was their great civilization is now associated with death and darkness. And so that seems bad. Like that's a complete disaster. And yet we have the promise, right? But still the sunken stars appear in dark and windless Mirrormere, right? The stars are still there. Durin's crown is still undimmed in the Mirrormere, which is itself the promise that he will wake again from sleep.
Arthurian. That
Yes. Yes.
Arthurian. You immediately, it's, you know, the lake and the once and future king coming back from the water, and it's, every time I read that, I'm just so struck by how much that seems like he's just lifting that out of.
Yeah, well, and it is a very similar kind of movement of hope, right? The very idea of carving on the tomb, right? The once and future king, to that combination of sorrow and a sign of hope to come. Yeah, that is very similar to what we can see there from the dwarves in Khazad-dûm, and even. You know, Matt, I think we can hear a shadow of that same hope in Gandalf's words to Gimli, right? When he talks about Balin, when they find the book, right, and he reads from the book of Mizarbil, and then he said, so ends, right, so ended the attempt to retake Moria. It was brave but foolish. The time had not yet come. Right. Not yet come is, of course, on the one hand, a recognition that Balin's failure and death, right? And yet, not yet come suggests that it will come someday, right?
Yeah. It's not an outright, you know, kind of condemnation of what Balin attempted. It was he got in too much of a rush, and you know, it wasn't time for the dwarves to return. Yeah,
absolutely.
If it be not now, yet 'twill come. I mean, I know Hamlet's talking about something else there, but you know,
yeah.
And I like this, how water, the reflection of the stars in the Mirrormere. You know, that's it's a theme that you get in literature a lot. This idea, you had it in pagan times, that when they put bodies into the water, they believed that you passed through the water to whatever lay beyond, that the water was a gateway and a portal. And you get this so often, this idea of seeing stars reflected, hope reflected, some gateway to that, whatever that promise is that lies ahead. And of course you have the antithesis of that in the Dead Marshes, where what you're seeing reflected is
Death.
a sort of underworld,
Yes.
something beyond death, but it's dark and dangerous, and but there's still that idea of the water being a portal through to something that lies beyond, and the reflected stars. It makes me think of there's a poem by Maeterlinck called Reflet, about exactly that, sort of seeing things in the water that are reflections of life, but possibly are leading you into some hope for another world, you know. And so it's very striking that Tolkien uses the reflection in the water there.
Yeah. Well, and even thinking about the Dead Marshes there, that too is another example of Tolkien's, the way in which he does not back away from suffering, right? The way in which he I mean, even the land remembers, right? I mean, the Battle of Dagorlad was 3,000 years ago, right? But the land has not forgotten all of the suffering. You know, you may look at I've thought this often when I've been at, you know, historical sites, at places where battles took place, right? And you just kind of look around at the landscape and try to imagine, right, what it was like on that day, with thousands dead lying on, you know, this field that I'm standing in. And in Tolkien, the field remembers, right? The field, and you can still see it, right? It brings it in front of you, and just in case you don't notice, it lights little candles, right, to direct your attention to it. Tolkien never he never just tries to make us forget suffering or overlook suffering, even old suffering, like not just suffering in the present, but suffering in the past. He recalls that. So yes, that presence of grief, that reminder of it, and yet it is a really interesting correspondence, right? The vision of previous death and suffering that we see in the Dead Marshes, and that vision of hope, Matt, in the Crown of Durin, right? That we see in the Mirror, that gives the hope that even though everything has been wrecked in you know, that Khazad-dûm is now just Moria, the Black Pit, and there's still, at the time the poem is recited, a Balrog living in it, right?
Right.
Yet, you know, they shall come again, and it will, you know, there will still be rebuilding. There will still be hope.
And I love that, you know, that crown of stars. It just reminds me of the fact that every peoples, all the free peoples, take comfort in the stars. You know, we see Sam obviously in Mordor. We know the elves. You know, everybody, even the dwarves. You know, their hope, you know, in some cases comes from the reminder that seeing the stars brings. And I just love that connects the different races.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, I found myself, when I was reading the passage this morning that I referenced when I first joined you guys on this chat, of Sam seeing like the star way up there, the clouds part, and it really it made me think of the people in Turkey and Syria who were searching in the rubble, and the photo that I'd seen online of a little girl and her brother who were found alive, thank goodness, where she had been cradling her brother, you know, and you just think, in that moment when the rescuer pulls the rubble back, and you as the person trapped see that moment of light, the clouds parting and Sam seeing the star, I found it really struck home to me, because it really made me think of people being pulled out of the darkness, literally, in the aftermath of these terrible events, and that hopefully these incredible people who go and search and do the rescuing are they're making the clouds part.
Yeah.
Yes.
For the, extraordinary.
Yeah. And although, as we said before, not, it is, everything sad doesn't come untrue, right? And yet there are stories like that. There are, there are the survivors. There will be rebuilding. It will. There is hope on the other side of this suffering, and the grief, the sorrow, the struggle won't and shouldn't be, forgotten and glossed over. And again, Tolkien is so. Whenever bad things happen, I find, whether they're like individual things going on in your own life, or whether they're bigger things like this happening all around you, there have been so many people I know who have just experienced so much comfort from Tolkien's work. It has had that power to really provide help and a kind of anchor through all of this. And I know this is, to kind of turn it in the end towards Tolkien himself. And, Kirsten, you were kind of talking about some of this earlier, this is how he like showed his own pity, right? This is how he turned his own suffering and his own experience into this, into, and made something good come from it, right? Brought something, I think, more beautiful than even he could possibly have imagined, come from it as a result of the, and so, so once again, the very real sufferings that he endured, both those in the war and the death of his loved ones and his orphaning as a child and all of these other things that he himself suffered, and yet he brought beauty out of that, and good came from that for so many. And I know that we're all have all at various points been very grateful for that. Well, speaking of gratitude, we've now raised over 40,000 lira today during the broadcast.
Excellent.
Very, very grateful for everybody who has been, and of course, and I know many of you may also have been donating in other places as well. So I'm sure it's even more than that. But many thanks to everybody. Thanks to our guests for joining us. Any final thoughts? Anything you want to leave people with before we go today?
I would just love to hear it from our friend. I'm going to completely butcher the pronunciation, but the Tolkien fans, like the Orta Dunya. I don't know how you say it, because when
It's close enough.
I didn't get to hear it from you when I joined the chat, and I would love to just
I want to thank each and every one of you. It's really great to show this solidarity in Tolkien communities. Really, thank you. And thank you for choosing Hope Team for today, because not only donations, but boosting morale is really important. And it was really good for all of us. And I want to convey a message from one of our followers, because as far as I know, he follows most of you, Dr. Corey Olsen, Matt, and the Prancing Pony podcast. He says, "Who would have thought that he says, and I quote, "Who would have thought that the Tolkien professor whose broadcasts I regularly watch only a few weeks ago would try to help me in a major disaster I was victimized by, and I won't be able to watch it now." I don't know if he has no shelter or internet, but I wanted to convey his message to you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, well, it is, again, we're just with small hands trying to do what we can here, and I certainly am myself very would like to think that we can help convey some hope to people, and just kind of remind folks of the hope that is there, and to let people know that we're thinking of you and helping however we can. Again, so many thanks to everybody who has been generously donating, so that we can provide as much relief as possible to the folks who are suffering through this. And we will hope to stay in touch, John, and find out how things are going, to get some updates there, and if there's maybe more we could do in the future. But certainly all of our hearts go out to you, as you say, the Tolkien community standing together in solidarity. We'd just love to do whatever we can. So if a message of hope is going to be, it will be some encouragement to people. I sure hope that it will be today.
We made masks during lockdown and COVID at the One Ring. We made masks that said on them, "The shadow is fleeting and merry our meeting, be of good hope."
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Very good. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for this special broadcast. Thank you very much for our guests. Thank you guys for being able to come. I know there are others who wished they could come, but had I did this kind of spontaneously because I didn't want to wait. So I just I said, hey, all right, let's just do this on Saturday. And I know that a lot of people weren't able to do that. So thank you guys for in very short notice jumping in here and joining us today. And thank you all, and we will see you again soon as we continue our relationship in Tolkien together. So thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thanks,
Thanks for putting this together.
Of course. Bye.